Great. So Mike Scott, welcome to Mentor Moments. I am particularly excited about the interview today. Um, we are really looking at people who we see as front runners in terms of leadership, particularly in attracting, retaining top talent in the tech space. And you come with a wealth of experience. I mean, I know personally I follow your posts, listen to your podcasts, and you've actually co-founded two successful ventures, the last one being Nona Digital, which you exited um, in 2021, 2022. And you now consult two leadership teams in terms of how to put the correct management systems in place, how to lead those teams for great results. So today's session, I'm sure we're going to gain a lot of insight. And I wanted to kick off with just a really when I was looking at this and I looked at a Gartner study, and we all know that top tech talent is the people who are really driving digital transformation, innovation in organizations, particularly fintech and banking. And what they actually said, over 60% of this top talent is looking at leaving in the next year. And now that's a staggering figure. And if you think of how much you invest in your people and how people form that team dynamic and that momentum, to have people leaving, suddenly leaving, really sets the business back. And I think this takes us into the question of what you believe, and I mean, this is vast and exhaustive, but if you had to choose one thing that you think a leader can really bring into the team to motivate and retain top talent, what would you focus on?
Yeah, we were chatting beforehand, and I'll say what I said then as well. Is this is such a vast subject, and I don't think there's one thing. But if I was pushed for one, after a bit of thought, I think it's a very practical one, and that is to really invest very heavily in the one-on-one meeting rhythm and content with all of your direct reports. I think this is an area that is very mismanaged and very sort of overlooked, and really where the rubber hits the road. So let me get into a little bit of detail. So one of the best sources that I've come across with this is from the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott, who's someone who's really worth listening to. And very simply, the way that I think about these one-on-ones is that the one-on-one meetings, I don't believe, should just be like informal catch-up. They should be very structured so that people in your organization have a predictable experience in what they're going to experience in these one-on-ones, no matter who their manager is, right? So the manager will bring their flavor and bring their style, but the format, I believe, should be quite structured. So at a minimum, you can layer on extra stuff, but at a minimum, this is what I think it needs to look like. We need to start these sessions with, hey, last time we met, you said you were going to do some stuff. Did you do that stuff? So there's a bit of accountability here. If yes, cool. What was the impact? If no, what was more important? What did you decide to prioritize? If you're too busy, where are you too busy? So this is not micromanagement. This is going, you said this was important. You did it. Great. You did not do it. Why? Let's unpack that. Not micromanage, unpack, because you can get some real insights. Yeah, that's a few minutes. The bulk of the meeting then needs to go into, hey, of the things you're trying to do, achieve, move the needle on, how are you going? Now, there's an implication here that you can only have a meaningful segment talking about that if that's actually clear. And that's really what I'm talking about here, is that great talent wants to be very clear on what is expected of them, how they are being measured, that they actually buy into that those metrics make sense and are motivating, and that they can actually have influence over them, and that people actually care, that it's meaningful. So we spend time going, how are you progressing along these things? It blows my mind how rare it is that we get these amazing people into our business, but we don't create the clarity on exactly what's expected for them. So we don't even know like what's motivating them, what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know. So they start playing other games, etc. So that's the next segment. The last segment, very simply, is cool. Of all the things we spoke about today, what are you committing to doing between now and the next time we meet so that we can close that loop, right? This might sound oversimplistic, but it
Mm.
forces you to do a bunch of things that are generally not done very well, which is bring accountability into high performance relationships.
Mm.
You can only do that when you have very clear expectations.
Mm.
If we go back to
Mm.
Patrick Lencioni's five dysfunctions of a
Yes.
team, there's a lot of amazing literature on that. You can go and look at that. But
Yes.
it forces you to actually have these very fundamental parts of performance that unfortunately are lacking too much. So, I'm forced to give you just one, and even that, there's many hours we can talk about this, but it's
Yes.
that format of, hey, did you do what you said you were going to do? Let's
Yes.
talk about the things that you're actually tracking and trying to optimize and progress. And hey, what are you going to do between now and the next time we meet? And we're doing this like week in, week out.
And you're creating a rhythm through that. And I was actually speaking to a colleague, and we we're saying when you're working in an environment and there's no feedback loops, it creates a lot of uncertainty, it creates anxiety, and it hinders performance.
Absolutely.
So I mean, a great insight. And then it leads me into my next question, which really is about where, from your experience and from working with leadership teams and high performing teams, what are the barriers that are often overlooked or that are unconsciously not seen and can stop a team from really becoming high performing?
Yeah. So I think two things. I'll start on one and see if it makes sense to go to the other one. So I think the first one is quite a harsh one. I want to be quite like direct about this, and that is that, Jim Collins, I think, is the one who said, show me a dysfunction in a team and I'll show you dysfunction in the leadership. In other words, leadership needs to take responsibility for any dysfunction in their team. It doesn't matter if it's obviously their fault or not. It is your fault, like regardless of what you think. Now, the most common place that I see this is that the leadership does not model the behavior that they expect from other people. And this is like a softer side of things, right? This is not a hard skill, but it's like, do as I say, not as I do. You live out these values, you live out these performances, you live out these behaviors, but I don't need to. That is a culture killer. That is a surefire way to lose great talent. We as leaders, or you as leaders, need to be consistently checking your own behavior that you're modeling and make sure that you're modeling the behavior that you expect from your team. Because if you're not modeling it, you can forget about your team displaying that behavior. At best, you might get it for a very short amount of time and then they'll leave or check out. When you're modeling that behavior, it's the best form of leadership. When you're showing up and modeling how you expect things to work, you have the best chance of success. This is not completely linear because sometimes it's inefficient or not sensible to like do everything that you expect people to do. But if you're a leader, you should know the difference between these two things. We're talking about values, principles, defining behavior. Too often, it's like, you guys need to do this stuff, but I don't have to. That doesn't work. So that's the sort of one significant barrier. I think another significant barrier is, and this is a bit softer even still, is that as leaders, we don't actively seek out criticism. As leaders, we need to create a space where people are completely comfortable criticizing and calling us out. But we have to go first. We have to invite criticism. And then when we get it, there's a critical moment in how we respond to that. Because very rarely will people feel sort of comfortable to be direct. And we have to not only invite those moments, but actually respond really, really positively in those moments. Because even though it can be uncomfortable, the only way we really get real data to make real decisions is if we can build these spaces where people are, I think the term these days is like psychologically safe. That's not easy because often you got to be careful what you wish for. You create these spaces and then you're like, Jesus, I don't expect you to be that honest. But you've got to show up in that moment and be like, okay, this is good. Now I've got honesty. Now I can actually do stuff with it.
Yes, and see that as a tool. And I think it's also to put your own ego aside and also realize this is for the betterment of yourself and the overall team, and having that feedback and then taking it and I mean, do you find that once you get that feedback, how do you as a leader then deal with that? Is it something that you take in, you let it marinate? Do you put it into action? How do you show that you've taken that and actually seen value in it?
That's a really good question. So I think this actually leads on to like something that's worth almost speaking about in and of itself is It's so okay. To answer your question directly, sometimes it can be really confronting and really difficult. And it's totally fine to say, I don't have an answer for that right now, but I'm going to think about it and come back to you, rather than trying to pretend you know everything. Right. Sometimes it's fine just saying, I don't know. I don't know the answer, right? But we'll figure this out together. What I think is worth mentioning here, though, is it's a slightly different topic, but I think it's really, really important. And something I see quite often is a company will put a piece of software into their business that regularly does ENPS surveys or questions or some kind of like, how are you feeling? What are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. They collect all this data, but they never, ever circle back to the person. In my opinion, that is a net negative. That is a net negative. If you're asking for people for feedback and you're not coming back to them and ever circling back, I think it's better not to do anything at all. So what I'm saying here is like, if we're asking people for their opinions, if we're asking them to be honest, if we're getting them to give us responses or suggestions, circle back to them. And the nuance here is you don't have to solve their problems. You don't have to give them what they're asking for. You just need to acknowledge and come back to them. I cannot tell you the difference. So what I mean by this is, if you're sending out like a start, stop, continue, what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we keep doing? And people are actually taking the time to fill this out meaningfully. If you don't come back to them, they'll just stop doing it. Like they'll just go nothing, nothing, nothing. If they say, hey, we should start having free French champagne every night with oysters and caviar, you don't have to say, cool, we're doing it. But just coming back to them and saying, hey, interesting suggestion. Look, I don't think we can afford that with the budget. This is why I'm coming. I want to hear more. People just want to be heard. And I think leaders often feel like we have to say yes to everything as a response. You don't. People want to be heard. We all want to be heard. So listen and circle back. Otherwise, don't do it. Like I've seen this so many times where it's like we fill out these surveys, we never hear anything back. What's the point?
Exactly. And that creates demotivation. So it's just a tick box exercise.
But it's a negative tick box exercise. It's a net negative. It's not a positive thing.
Yes, yes. Mike, I think I would like to thank you for your time. And I would like to recommend our community, and we'll put the link into your podcast because I've certainly gained a lot of value from there. There's a lot of great episodes there around managing your team, managing yourself. So, I mean, we'll put the link in that. We'll also put a link in. I know you do leadership and coaching of teams, but it's been really great just sharing your insight and your wisdom in our series. And thank you for taking the time. And all the best with all your endeavors that you are taking forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It was nice to chat.
Great. And